And you're live, you can go.
Hey guys, Katie here from Equestrian Movement, and we are doing our 7th presentation today for the first Do No Harm Summit. So we are on to day 3, which is the last day. I'm just gonna mute myself. There we go, my bad. So we're on to our 7th presentation, last day, but we still have plenty of jam-packed sessions for you today. We're talking to Lindsay this morning from Savvy Horsewoman, and she's going to talk to us about boundaries with our horses and how that can improve our horsemanship and relationship with our horses. Before we get started, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who's been presenting for gifting us their time and their knowledge. It has been so amazing, and I'm going to be going back and rethinking some of my horse husbandry after watching some of the presentations we've had so far. We've talked thinking business in a modern world. We've been talking bit injuries, hoof care, aromatherapy, and we're going to continue the conversation today with talking boundaries, good halter handling with foals, physio for people to make sure that we're not impacting our horses significantly with our riding, and then the body worker actually for the horses as well to give them a hand along. And then Sarah's going to be talking worming this evening, which is going to be pretty exciting. She's going to say all the big words that I can't say. So as we go along, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I will ask them of Lindsay. And if you're watching on the replay, hashtag replay, and she'll be able to get back to you there as well. We have ongoing conversations with our other presenters in their lives where they've been answering people who are watching on the replays. If you do feel a bit uncomfortable about posting in the group, feel free to message us. I know that it can be a bit big and intimidating and overwhelming, but we are so grateful to have you here and giving us your time as well to learn. We're just here for the horses and making sure that we can be the best people for them that we can be. So we're just honestly grateful that you're here committing to your horse as well. So if you miss the replay, you can watch the replays. If you miss the live, or if you have to leave, you can watch the replay within the group, and you will also get the link sent through to your email address. The link in the email will be available for 2 weeks, but these videos will stay in the Facebook group for as long as you need to revisit them. So I will stop talking and let Lindsay tell us about herself.
Oh, hi there. Thanks so much for having me. First, I want to say thanks so much for hosting this summit. I think it's really a great topic for all of us, especially even if we have tons of experience with horses or even a little bit. So that's awesome. As Katie said, my name is Lindsay, and I am one half of SavvyHorsewoman.com, where we cover everything that a horse owner needs to know, including DIY horse care, horse ownership on a budget, horse riding, horse training, that sort of thing. A lot of what we cover is the basics of horse ownership. So even if you're living in a place that's not close to a stable or a trainer, you can feel more confident about having your horse and giving your horse the best life possible. So yeah, that's a little about me.
Yeah, sounds awesome. I'm in your Facebook group, and there's some really cool tips about different ways to deal with horses on a budget, which we definitely are all looking for because they can be so expensive. I just looked at like $500 for a stupid puncture in the knee because I completely missed the puncture. I thought he'd done a tendon or something with the swelling, and turns out it was a simple puncture that I could have saved myself a couple of
no.
We always have those weird random vet bills that pop up, just like scratch the budget before we're ready.
Right.
So we're talking today with you about boundaries with horses. What are we looking at when we're talking boundaries in horsemanship?
Well, boundaries is kind of, it's an interesting thing because usually it's the source of a lot of miscommunications with our horse, and kind of those sort of behavioral issues or communication issues that come up between us and our horses, whether, you know, during doing groundwork or just basic manners all the way up to riding. Usually the breakdown that happens is has something to do with boundaries and us saying, you know, like where we can create a safe space for an equine partnership. So a lot of us don't really notice our lack of boundaries. So like we might like not realize like how inconsistent we're being, like when our horse keeps whacking us, you know, like on the back, or like trying to get in our face, or even something as simple as walking past us, I think is a really good indicator of where we're at with boundaries. So like something that I used to watch when I was living at a barn with newer horse owners is that maybe they'd taken a lot of lessons, but then I noticed that their horse would just start walking past them, just leading them from one place in the barn to the other. And then pretty soon their horse wasn't listening to them with anything. And they're like, well, where did I go wrong? Like I was just trying to like do what was right for the horse. And I think that people think, you know, with boundaries, it's something that's unkind or like, you know, being too strict with the horse, but really you're saying, no, this is what's safe for both of us. And this is what's going to keep us on good terms and in a good partnership. And then, you know, and then we're not unnecessarily punishing our horses later.
Yeah. I think that's where, you know, the heavy-handedness and the punishment comes from, is because of the inconsistency of the boundaries, and then they do just kind of take it too far. And so that is where that discipline escalates into, you know, something that we don't really want to be doing. It's also really easy, I think, to let those little boundaries slip when we start to become more relaxed with our horses. I know, when I was working at stables with 30, 40 horses, I wasn't.
Oh my gosh. 4 horses behind you. Yeah, totally.
Hay over the fence, like no interruption.
Right.
So
you gotta do.
What would happen if what sort of behaviors and whatnot would we see if we're not establishing boundaries with our horses?
Well, first and foremost, you kind of see what we were talking about. You see them being more pushy. I think that's kind of the first indicator that we're kind of lax on our boundaries. And that's kind of the baby stage of like, you know, where we can see a lack of boundaries. But where it gets to be a little more exacerbated is kind of when we start seeing horses that are tense or fearful or aggressive. And it's for those reasons that you talked about, because we've let them become so pushy and then we punish them when their behavior has gotten too out of hand for us. We think that they can read our minds, and then when they don't, then we punish them somehow. And then so what that creates is a really tense and confused horse. And a tense and confused horse, you know, down the line will become more aggressive or more skittish or just kind of more apprehensive towards humans in general. So it's, I think on the lower end of the scale, it's pushy and maybe a little confused about what you're asking. And then on the higher end of the scale, it's all the way up to skittish or aggressive.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Boundaries are one of my favorite topics as well. Even though I can be lax in them, even holding yourself accountable, hey.
For sure. And I think, I mean, honestly, I started really thinking a lot about boundaries when I was really practicing them with humans. And just like everything else, it was like I went to the horses to understand humans better, you know, and I started noticing that the more consistent I was with boundaries, just in the little stuff, the more happy my horse was, the more happy, and the quicker I was able to get to know other horses, you know, because we have that phase with our horses where, or even a new horse that we're riding, where they're going to push us. And that's completely natural. I mean, if you read anything about horses in the wild, they're constantly testing where everyone's at in the herd. So, and the thing that's interesting, what I came across when I was researching about herd dynamics is that herd dynamics are constantly being renegotiated, but the stronger the roles are, like all the way from alpha all the way down, the stronger the roles are, the more peace the whole herd is at all times. And so I think that can really relate to us, you know, because we need to be our horses' leaders. And so if we're not reinforcing boundaries from the get-go, or if we're not being consistent about them, our horse internally, whether it can articulate it to us or not, internally they're saying, okay, something's changing. I don't know what it's going to look like. And you can see kind of where the fear builds up from there.
Yeah, totally, 100%. And I don't know, I'm pretty good at taking us on tangents. So
let's go. Giddy up.
Just following up on that story about how horses, will interact in the wild and in a herd, and then we create this environment that isn't natural for them and expect them to know how to behave appropriately. I've definitely seen improvements that aren't a result of my training skills or my students' training skills, but just introducing the right horses to the herd. Obviously, it's not something that everybody can do, but supporting our horses to be emotionally balanced with their herd mates. Have you seen improvements there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think with what they do, outside of our riding time definitely impacts how they are, when we're riding them, just because overall they feel, like you said, they feel more balanced for sure. And they feel more like, I think any way that we can build up their confidence outside of the arena definitely impacts our time with them one-on-one. And like you said, it is an unnatural environment to be at a barn. So any way we can mimic or make them feel like it's not a foreign situation, the better.
Yeah, perfect. So what kind of things will you be doing to establish boundaries with the horses that you're working with?
Well, I kind of have like a system when it comes to boundaries. There's boundaries that are for, fixing problems. And then there's boundaries for like building blocks for training, but they all follow kind of like the same format. So kind of the ABCs of boundaries are basically, first, I like to set an understanding of what I want. For example, we all come from different backgrounds, in training, but we pretty much have an understanding of what's safe, what manners horses should have, and what kind of attitude we want to reward. But I think taking a little bit of time, especially if we're having some behavioral issues with our horses, just taking a minute before we go to the barn to just kind of understand, okay, these are the behaviors that I'm kind of dreading, like facing right now when I go see my horse, or this is like the rub that I've seen with my horse recently. If we can not just articulate the negative thing, but try to articulate the positive thing to ourselves first. I mean, this kind of goes into like equestrian mentality coaching. Like if we can picture the positive first, I think that's going to help us get our horse from point A to point B. So, because what we're going to do is, we need to be able to reward the try, And so in order to be able to reward our horse trying to take one step from point A to point B, from the bad behavior to the good behavior, we have to understand completely what the good behavior is in order to reward the small steps. So that's kind of step one. And then step two is kind of applying pressure when we see the negative behavior. So like, for example, a big, like the example I used before is like, our horse walking in front of us. It could be springtime, or it just could be like, you haven't seen your horse in a week, but regardless, they're like, they should be behaving the same, right? Your expectations shouldn't have changed. Or, if your horse is rushing past you when they go out of the stall, that's a dominance issue. That's a dominance struggle right there. Or I wouldn't even go far as to say struggle. I'd say that's a dominance negotiation, So
I like
that.
I like it.
Yeah.
Negotiation.
Yeah, because I think
like how our horses can challenge us.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to say that it's like, I don't want to frame it in negative light, because that's what horses are wired to do, So, when the horse rushes out of the stall, the first thing you want to do is pull them back. If they've completely rushed past you, bring them on back, put them back in the stall. Be like, no, we're going to do it right away. Like, don't wait 5 minutes and then try it again. You know what I mean? So you'll want to catch it as quickly as you can. And I think this is where our training comes in, because then when we train ourselves to catch it quickly, then we're creating a habit for ourselves too. So take your horse back. And then when you see your horse trying to rush past you again, give him a little pressure. Apply some pressure, like jerk on the lead rope, try to get him to back into the stall, and then try again. And then pretty soon you'll start seeing that they're going to at least pay attention to you, even if they're still trying to rush past you. And you just keep on repeating the process until they follow behind you safely, even if it's just a couple of steps. You reward them. I mean, you can give them some pats and, you know, some gentle words. You can give them a treat. You can, you know, depending on how bitey your horse is, you could, you know, just reinforce that, that they're being rewarded. Because what that does is that by, I mean, just basic pressure and release principles, applying pressure means a lack of peace or at least discomfort for the horse. And then that release means that they're at peace. Everything's good between me and the horse. And so what that does is it not only rewards good behavior, but it also reinforces your consistency as a leader. And then it causes your horse to deepen their trust in you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I really like the fact that you used, you know, the experience of the very first interaction you have with your horse in the morning, which is bringing them out of the stable, because you can be like 100 things on your mind, and just, you know, trying to rush down, smash out a ride with your horse because you know that it needs exercise, but you still go get home and, you know, set the kids up for the day and do your cooking, do your chores, like you got to-do list.
Totally.
That you will be often not in the right mindset to catch those behaviors when they come up. And so that's where we lose that consistency, is that we're like, oh, just leave that for today because I can't deal with correcting it. But then we've given the horse an inch, and then that's where they gain that momentum, where the behaviors do escalate from there when they're challenging us.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so true. Like you say, when we come to the barn, sometimes we don't realize how much mental baggage we're bringing too. And so it's a good check for us too, to be like, okay, where's my head at? You know, because if you think about it, you have that first experience with your horse, you know, at the very beginning, you're leading them out of the stall, like they're blowing past you, whatever, we're going to go to lunge. And then, you know, that could set the tone for your lunging session. It could set the tone for your tacking up, and then it could set the tone for your whole ride. And then pretty soon, whereas your horse started out not listening to you and ended not listening to you, but except you're on their back now. When you could have gotten their attention at the very beginning and then influenced your whole ride, you know.
I definitely find that you have, you know, a window at the beginning of a training session where you can either get the horse on board with the training session,
right?
Or you're going to spend the whole session arguing with them over whether or not they're going to cooperate.
Right. It's so true. And well, and that, go ahead.
Sorry, continue.
Well, and I think that also speaks to, you know, our relationship with our horse, and whether we're going to be like fighting through a training session or whether we're going to be like having a discussion and trying to, like, because with pressure and release, you know, what you're trying to do is just create it so that, you know, create a space to where your horse wants to work, or your horse wants to at least, you know, have that discussion with you under saddle. And so when they already feel like, oh, well, I got my way, and then now I don't want to do this, and then you're saying, no, we have to do this, and then they're like, well, but I got my way before, why am I not the leader anymore? And then all of a sudden we're having a fight instead of, you know, like, instead of reinforcing the good. And I think that's where a lot of times, like, kind of show barns can tend to get that way, but in an amplified version, because, you know, it's all this hustle and bustle, you know, we're all trying to get to the right place at the right time. And then pretty soon we have a tense horse that's, you know, freaking out about something. We're like, how did we get here? You know, and, you know, it's all of these external agendas that are just not really focused on the horse, when we could have figured out, you know, from the very beginning, oh, my horse is tense. You know, is it because the weather has changed? Is it because my horse is stiff? You know, I mean, are they nervous for some reason? And so there's all of these like checking points that you can miss too, you know, by not paying attention.
Yeah. So what would you say, would you sometimes have students that find the escalated behavior a little intimidating? And I think that they can lose some consistency there because they don't want to discipline the horse and, like, you know, set that boundary with them because they're scared of the argument.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that I've seen a lot, with people who, they get a horse, they've been around horses, they've been taking horse riding lessons, and they know how to ride a horse. They know how to take care of a horse. They know all the basics. But then when it comes to that first, disagreement or the horse being pushy, they don't want to, like you said, they don't want to discipline their horse. They don't want that argument with this 1,200-pound animal. And then pretty soon that little argument, could turn into a big argument. And I've seen it to where people don't want to be around their horses anymore, and that's really sad to me, just because, it can be something like a really, really simple fix, like we're talking about. And I think it's never a bad idea to get a second opinion. Like, I saw this one lady at the barn one time, and she just had her sweet little Arab behind her. He was a 20-year-old Arab, which again goes to show this isn't just an age thing. This isn't just a temperament thing. This is a sweet, old, experienced, was a kid's horse, could do everything. But he was just like tugging on her lead rope. She was standing, and he was quietly behind her at first. And then he was tugging her lead rope farther and farther away from her hands, and like kind of bumping her and this and that. And I was like, and so she would like pull back, like, don't do that. And then she'd release immediately while he was still flinging his head, and I was like, you're teaching him to do that more, because you're pulling on it. And then when he flails his head more, you're releasing. And I think same with like head tossing under saddle. Like we don't always know that. We just kind of need to be patient and like give them, give them the space to understand, okay, this is not an option, being supple is an option, like being calm is an option. And I think where people start to panic, especially if they don't feel confident in their horsemanship skills, or if they're afraid of falling off, is, they feel like, when I'm on the horse, like if I say no, I'm going to be bucked off, or if I say no, I'm going to get a big argument. And really it's just about getting settled, in yourself, just being patient, and then once you ask your horse to do something, just staying consistent. And then as soon as he releases, then you release too. And I think a lot of people think it's going to be a big thing, because they see, they may have seen trainers who have had a big blowout with their horse, but that's actually like kind of extreme. Like that's after a lot of compounded things. So I think people in your mind, you think the worst, and then, so you don't correct it. And then it does worsen. But if you're at a place where you have a really dangerous behavioral issue, there's definitely no shame in getting someone like a second opinion or a friend to help you out, and just start with the basics. I would say start with their good behavior, reward it. Start with the simple things that and feel confident that you can reward. Even if it is a small behavioral issue, start with that and then work your way up to the big thing. And then don't go too fast. Like I think I've seen other trainers who just like want to push the horse's buttons until they do something bad, and then they can punish it.
Yeah.
And that can really destroy a horse's mind and spirit, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that it never ever works, because of course there's anomalies, but typically you want to create a safe space. You don't want to dominate just to dominate, if that makes sense. Because if you think of any boss we've had, any leader you've had, they've always had tremendous amounts of grace, even if they had rules, and I think we have to be the same way. Like we have to have tremendous amounts of grace and patience while we work towards the ideal.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. I love the idea of having grace. I don't feel like I have any.
Because it's hard, because they can be little turds. Yeah. But I was just listening to like a podcast this morning. It was the Plaidcast. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's on the Plaid horse. But they have a podcast, and they were talking to Monty Roberts, and he's always been a proponent of, when you approach your horse, go with humility, because that's the thing, is that every horse is so different. We're always going to be learning something new. So if you approach your horse with humility and curiosity, then you'll get a little bit farther with them, in your leadership, than you would if you just go in being like, oh, I know everything that you need to do, and I'm just going to make you do it. And then, all that.
100%. You always get sat on your butt if you approach your horse and you know what you're doing.
They know, they can feel it. Yeah.
So something that you said earlier that I really liked is that you can just as easily reinforce the behavior you don't want as you can reinforce the behavior you do want. And I think you can actually reinforce the behavior you don't want much quicker.
Yes.
You can reinforce the behavior you do want.
Yes.
So do you want to go into that a little bit with setting boundaries and how that works with pressure?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the big thing that we don't understand about ourselves, this is more of an internal thing. And you touched on this already, is that we're afraid of the argument. And so we give when our horse is pushing us, so like, for example, the head tossing thing. So like if you're riding a horse and your horse is just tossing its head, and every time they toss their head, you're releasing the reins or giving them more give on the reins, or you're not asking them what you were asking them to do anymore. You're going to reinforce that whenever they want to get their way or whenever they want to do that bad behavior, you're just going to give in, for whatever reason. And I think the sooner we can catch on to that, the sooner we can reinforce the good behavior. And that goes back to like knowing what we want from our horse. So we know what we don't want our horses to do, but sometimes not having a picture of what we want them to do is where we kind of have a disconnect. Like, for example, I was just lunging one of my friend's horses today, and it's super simple. Again, this is not advanced horsemanship. We were just lunging. The horse, Mac, he was very, like, he had done a good job. He was getting kind of tired, but he went from a trot to a walk before I asked him to. And so I can tell from there, and this is where grace comes in, I can tell from there, okay, he's tired. He hasn't been worked really hard for a few months. Cool. We can be done with that. But I didn't want to end it on his terms. As him being the leader or him like telling us when we were going to stop. Yeah. I wanted it, we wanted it to end on, on our terms where he would walk when it was, when we were ready to say walk. So I just had him trot like another half circle, almost a whole circle, and then boom, walk. Great job. We're done. And I think that's where we get caught up too, is we have a picture of how long like your horse should be doing the right thing. When a horse is brand new to something and you get let's say your horse is a young horse and having trouble like balancing a rider, it's like a really hard thing for horses to figure out how to balance themselves, let alone a saddle and then a rider on top of them. Yeah. So to get on a horse and just expect that your horse can trot with a really balanced cadence trot that you can sit to, no problem. Totally unrealistic, right? Yeah. And then so to punish your horse for not being able to go like 5 times around both ways at a perfect trot is just unrealistic. So like if this is your horse's first time doing something, or if you're correcting a bad behavior from before, and they don't do it perfectly for a prolonged period of time, that's not really fair to ask. All you really need is them to do it once. And I'm a total proponent of just like, if they do it once perfectly, hop off, good boy, you're back to the stable with some treats. Because that's giving them rest is the ultimate release. And then giving them food, of course, reward. Yeah, exactly. So they're really going to remember that because they're going to sit and think like, oh, like this got me here last time. And then you can ask a little more.
Because they can be really smart with figuring out the consequences. Like I know a lot of people talk about there's no such thing as a naughty horse because they don't like sit in their stable and plot against you. Right. But they also do know what behaviors got them certain things previously and then use that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, the great and the terrible thing about horses is their tremendous memories. Yeah. Terrible because they remember that mailbox that spooked them once that obviously was trying to eat them when they were going down the road. They're going to remember that because, whatever. But then the great thing too about their memories is that the more we reinforce the good, the more it's going to outweigh the bad,
Yeah, definitely. I always get so amazed. Like there's been situations, I've been training and riding for a long time now. I don't really want to give that away, but
Long enough.
And I'll have students that I've, spent 3 months on their horse, and then, life happens and they haven't been able to ride more than a trial ride here and there for like 2-3 years, and I'll go back and the horse remembers what we did in the previous training session.
Wow.
So it's such, that's
cool.
such a long period and such a short period of training and such a long period between training for them to retain that much information. Like it can, a lot of the times when I work with students, it's at that point they've got a new horse and, all of these behaviors that horse didn't exhibit when they went and tested it have come up. And I think it's like, it's still that memory, that retention of, 5-10 years ago, like when I was a young horse, I did this when I was in my breaking process, and it got me some certain leeways, and trying that same behavior out again on the new subjects, if you will.
Right. Right.
What can I get away with? They can be so cheeky.
It's so true. It's so true. And that's the thing is, I mean, I think the cool thing too is with horses is, the more you build a rapport with a horse, like the more you can deepen their trust. So what we think, might be negative for a horse, like setting boundaries or, saying this is okay and this isn't. I think a lot of the misconception about boundaries, at least from what I've seen, with friends who have their own horses, may not have a trainer, like, I don't want to be mean to my horse. And like, they think, okay, if I say no, then I'm not doing what the horse needs, instead of like, no, he's just being a jerk, or no, he's just trying to get something, or just trying to like, get away with something. Yeah. And so it doesn't make him a bad horse. It just makes it normal, but by reinforcing boundaries and just staying consistent, even if you're just being consistent in one little thing, that's going to help deepen your trust with that horse, like for everything else, and I think this is kind of pertaining to business, but I think it was Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. He goes to work, and his company mantra is to approach everything with the day one mentality. And I think that really applies it applies across the board. Like if you're in day one of business, what would you do to make the most of your day? Same thing with a relationship. Like if you're, 10 years married, but what if you approach every day with a day one mentality? Like you're just trying to win this person over. And same thing with your horse. Like what if, we approach our horses with this day one mentality of like, we don't know anything about each other, or like, I'm not expecting this horse to be perfect. How am I going to help continue to shape this horse with that day one mentality of always going back, like ready to learn together, ready to to put our best foot forward together.
I absolutely love that. I see one of the biggest things that holds my students back. I get to see all of the dangerous horses that are like a bit wild. And so I'm, generally working with novice riders to fix really extreme behaviors. And, we will get to a certain point in training where we will have that behavior resolved, but it's still in their memory that that's where that horse can take that behavior. I think if we had that day one mentality where we could, it's not forgetting, but there's always some that's why we talk about first do no harm, is there's always some underlying factors when that behavior is so out of control, like ulcers or dental issues, soft tissue injury, whatnot. And, when we can start resolving some of those things, my students still retain a little bit of that fear of what they've experienced with that horse. So trying to shift their mindset to say, it's okay, I can start trusting them now, is such a difficult transition to make sometimes.
For sure. That's huge. Yeah. And I mean, with that horse, with horses, I mean, sometimes it's so extreme to where it's with horses in general, like this horse will buck me off at some point, or when a horse tenses up like this, it's going to take off at a gallop or whatever. And I think that's huge. I mean, mentality is like 9/10 of horseback riding, it seems like sometimes, just because what our brains do when we have a bad experience is that we like replay it in our head over and over and over again. So our brain and our body, you know, because our brain and our body aren't disconnected, you know, our brain and our body feels like it's happened 100,000 times because we've replayed it in our brain that much. So that seems more real than the 10 awesome rides we had over the past 10 weeks, you know?
Oh, I feel that.
Yeah.
I had a really big injury when I first started out as a trainer with a horse bucking as I was mounting, and it's really hard to stay on when you don't have both legs in the stirrup.
No.
And I landed on my tailbone and really hurt my back.
Oh man.
Walked properly for a little while, and you know it sticks with you. Like I'm like a trainer, and I've been a breaker, and you know, my job is to mount unknown horses and horses
Right.
that are potentially going to buck. It really.
That's your thing. Yeah.
And to have that sit with you, and like every time you go to hop on an unknown horse, to have it in the back of the head, I could be put in hospital today, is such a challenge.
So nerve-wracking.
So with the Savvy Horsewoman, you guys are doing some pretty cool stuff over there. We are talking boundaries today because of how this summit is around first do no harm, and you know the boundaries mean that our horses can be handled more safely so that they don't hurt themselves, and also so that they don't hurt us. But you guys are doing lots of other things over there. You've got a 7-day horse challenge coming up.
Yeah, so we have Savvy Horsewoman has this 7-day horse care challenge. So it's kind of Savvy Horsewoman serves kind of all aspects of horsemanship. So we do DIY horse care, budgeting for horses, how to take care of your stables, and then, you know, horse training and horse riding on your own. So the 7-day horse care challenge is kind of for, you know, could be for brand new horse owners, or just if you're new to horse care in general, then it's just a 7-day course, and we just kind of walk you through some basics of horse care and maintaining a stable and safety and all of that for your horse, and you know, which follows in line with like do no harm, you know, just making sure your horse you know, has the best setup. So there should be a link to that, but we do, like, you know, with our content and, you know, with our upcoming membership, it kind of covers all aspects of horsemanship, everything from kind of training if you don't have your own barn, to horseback riding, you know, if you don't have a trainer nearby, as well as the same thing like horse care, horse budgeting, all of that.
Yeah, awesome. It sounds really good. So I guess we've probably covered a lot of the topics. Is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, you know, like we say, have grace with your horses. Definitely just have grace with yourself too. The big thing that I want to reinforce with boundaries, and I think places where I've seen people get discouraged before, is that they feel like because they don't know horses like a horse trainer does, they feel like they're inept at creating and training their own horse, or doing well with their own horse. Because I think that's the biggest saboteur of horse ownership and being safe around your horse, because you know, we think that we have to be perfect, and we think that we have to know everything about every kind of horse, but every horse trainer will tell you that, you know, nothing's ever perfect. We're always trying to figure out each new horse. And so just aim for consistency and give yourself grace, you know, with you and your horse. Don't aim for perfection, because none of us have gotten there. So
right, 100%. I think a big thing that the ball that you have in your court when it is your horse is you have the ability to establish a relationship and a connection with your horse that your trainer doesn't. It's kind of, you know, when you have your own horse, it's like having your kids, where they don't necessarily act out and misbehave for other adults.
Right.
They do like to push and challenge us and test our buttons.
Yeah, totally.
Our horses are definitely the same. I know that a lot of the horses that I work with can be perfectly behaved for me, because I only see them once a week, and I'm there
Right.
to lay down the law and set those boundaries for them. And then when it comes to you know, the day-to-day ins and outs, that's where they can really you know, just like, oh, I'm just going to test that a little bit. And if you're not in the right mindset to catch it at that point, that's where that behavior can escalate.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And like you said, that's a great benefit. And it's not, and it doesn't have to be, it's not something we have to consider a fault of our own. It's just the nature of horse ownership.
Yeah. We get to see them every day.
Yeah.
In all moods. I used to entertain myself when I worked at a stable. So we'd have like 40 horses to feed in the morning, and you know, it'd take me 2-3 hours depending on if I was rugging or whatnot. So I'd do like little diaries of the horses as I was walking around PMB. Dear diary, today get to talk to me in a certain way, and it made me really
Oh my gosh.
try and entertain myself and put myself in that horse's head. But you know, when we do go out to our horse each day, they also do have different moods as well for us to contend.
Yeah, it's so true. They're as moody as teenagers.
Yes. Oh, it was so lovely chatting with you, Lindsay. If anybody is looking for some horse budget tips and whatnot, make sure that Sarah's put the links in the Facebook there and in our chat, so can jump over and join your challenge.
Sweet. Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me. It was great chatting.
Thanks for your time.
Of course.